Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of DTV, Digital Transformation Channel. My name is Leila Modarres, and I am the CMO of InfoStretch. And we have with us here today Derek Weeks. Derek is the VP of and DevOps advocate of Sonatype, and we'd like to talk to you about what DevOps advocate really entails a little bit. But Derek, before we dive into that, can you tell us a little bit about Sonatype and what it is and what you guys offer?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me. This is exciting to be here. So Sonatype really sits in the development tools space. We've been working with developers for the last decade that Sonatype has existed, and we help developers do two things. One, we help them be much more efficient when they're using open source components in their development practices. And then we also help them stay more secure with those open source components that they're using in development. So we help with automating open source governance policies to make sure they're not using anything that's too risky. That could also include license types, license risks, or architectural risks with components that they're using. And a lot of organizations that we're working with simply don't want to be the next Equifax. So
for DTV, we like to try to shed some light on different interpretations of the term digital transformation. And so, as a technology leader, I think the first part of the question is, do you have an interpretation or a definition of this widely used ambiguous term? And the second part of the question, given, your focus on open source, is how would you describe the impact of open source on digital transformation then?
I think there used to be this idea of technology companies and this technology industry, and they were the ones developing technology to make the future better and more innovative. But today, really, every business is a software business in some form or fashion. So if you're an airline or a car company or a pharmaceutical company or a fitness company, you've applied software to your innovation to help offer your customers more value or to bring more value to the market than what customers were experiencing, to give them new levels of experience within the products and services that are being offered. That is happening more and more as more organizations are developing software. They're also developing it a lot faster than they used to be. And part plays into what you were just talking about in regard to open source. So today, 80 to 90% of an application is composed of open source components and third-party binaries, libraries, web application frameworks, or other things within the applications. And the reason for that is that developers don't want to code from scratch.
Right.
Don't want to code everything from scratch. So they could download from the internet in a second what might take days or weeks to produce.
What would you say are the benefits or the advantages of open source when it comes to DevOps?
There is a concept that we have to change our mindsets about how software is developed first. There are dev teams, test teams, operations teams, and those teams have to work together to understand what's being built and how quickly could we potentially bring those things to market. The first part is working together to try and achieve those goals. The next part that usually comes in is the automation of some of the tasks that we might normally have manually done in the past. So if we can bring automation to it, we can actually make those things work a lot faster. To me, a lot of people that are newer to DevOps talk about kind of the forward capabilities of automating something to deliver code to market faster. But they miss the part of DevOps, which is not only can we deploy things out fast, but if something fails, we can roll it back fast.
Right. You touched upon this a little bit earlier, risk. I mean, every time I think about open source and I think about enterprises, I also consider that they're really hesitant because of the risk factors. So how has that changed in the past several years, in your opinion? And what's sort of the myth versus the realities as far as risk is concerned?
When we think about open source components, libraries, binaries, frameworks, A lot of the risk came to light about 4 years ago when the Heartbleed vulnerability was announced, and that kind of made headline news in the security community.
Right.
Oh my gosh, this thing is out in the wild in millions of places because everyone used the same OpenSSL component.
Yeah.
It came more to light last year with the Equifax breach.
Yeah.
That people had to go and look for, are we using this vulnerable component? Everyone recognizes out there is we're using open source.
Right.
Everyone recognizes that there may be security vulnerabilities or other risks associated with this. Mm-hmm. But everyone kind of looks at the benefit more, far outweighing the risk. This year, we saw 1 in 8 components that were being open source components being downloaded for use in development that had known security vulnerabilities in them. The average organization doing Java development is consuming 170,000 of these open source components a year, with 1 in 8 having known security vulnerabilities from the start.
Yeah. Does it take a certain type of certification or experience to know which are the right ones to use?
Well, this is the challenge. The way the software development practices have evolved with open source. A lot of these components are simply brought in by development tools that you're using already. So if you're using Maven as a build tool, as an example, it will pull down the components that you need, plus all the direct and transitive dependencies that come along with it.
So it's an automation capability.
Right, and an average application may have 100, 200 open source components in it, of which the developer knows, I needed one, it pulled down 20 other things that it needed to work, and I don't necessarily explore those individually, nor do they come with kind of a food label of sorts to tell me this one is good and this one is bad. So you either have to go to lengthy manual reviews of each of those components to understand is it good or bad, or you rely on automation where machines can actually adjudicate, is this safe or is it vulnerable or does it have some risk associated with it? And if you let machines do this, they can actually keep up with the volume of consumption. To give you a sense, one of the things we've tracked over the last 10 years of this report is the consumption of Java open source components. 10 years ago, there were 10 million developers consuming 1 billion Java open source components.
Right.
Last year, that same population consumed 87 billion components.
Wow.
If you're one of the 6 million JavaScript developers out there, you consume 26,000 JavaScript or NPM packages a year. The repository that serves those from the internet, run by an organization called NPM, they saw 6 billion downloads a week in August. 6 billion downloads.
Wow.
There's only 6 million JavaScript developers on the planet. So the amount of open source being used is growing phenomenally because a year and a half ago they were at 4 billion downloads a week.
So let's turn it back to DevOps for a moment. Tell me, you're the organizer of All Day DevOps.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about what types of roles, titles, organizations are getting involved, and what's it all about?
Yeah, so we started, my colleague and I, Mark Miller, founded All Day DevOps just about 2 years ago. And we had this concept that we were showing up to all of these DevOps conferences, and we would meet, say, someone from Fidelity, and we'd talk to them about their DevOps practice, and we'd say, well, how many people are in your DevOps practice? And they'd say, 500 or 700 or whatever the number was. And how many people are here? Oh, there's 2 of us, right? So we saw these conferences that had this great content, but only a small part of organizations could afford to travel to the conference or pay the registration fees or what have you. So we said, let's put this conference, let's create a DevOps conference for everyone where we can put it online, bring the same quality speakers to the audience that we would attract. We'll make it free so anyone anywhere can do it because it's online. We have 5 tracks from CI/CD to DevSecOps to cultural transformations to SRE to cloud native infrastructure. So we have a whole host of different topics. We have about 120 speakers this year that will run through those tracks over 24 hours.
And
So-
what are there any new interesting developments that you're seeing coming out of this group or this large
Yeah,
group?
so one of these things, and this is very much, while Mark and I started it, it is a community effort to put the conference together. So at one point during the organizing last year, one of our speakers from the first year, Sumit Agarwal, who he works at Broadridge Financial.
Right.
We were having dinner and he said, you should have a cultural transformations track. And I said, okay, we could. Do you want to run that? And he said yes, and we had a cultural transformations track. This year we've added an SRE track because we are hearing conversations around SRE that were coming up more and more. And I don't know anything about SRE really, but I asked people that knew. And they said, yeah, I think that would be a good fit. And I asked for their help in running it and organizing that track. So we brought that to light. I think the other thing that's fascinating for a virtual conference is this concept of viewing parties, that people have said, we don't want to just watch from home or watch from our office alone. So the communities out there have organized so far 88 viewing parties in different cities around the world where people can gather kind of like a meetup and watch together and have conversations. Part of what people said is, if you're going to do an online conference, I'm missing the hallway track. So how do I have the conversations with people? So in addition to broadcasting on YouTube Live, as we do, allowing everyone access, we have Slack as our Q&A channel.
Oh, great.
And last year we had 30,000 conversations on Slack during the 24 hours of the conference. So people would hear from peers or practitioners like themselves and say, I need help, or where did you find that, or did you open source that thing that you were talking about? And they would just trade knowledge between each other, and people found it so helpful.
Thank you for your time. This was very insightful, particularly the role that automation is now playing in open source. Thank you so much for joining us on DTV.
Thank you.
And this concludes our latest episode of the Digital Transformation Channel. Thank you for joining us.